اوكي شيخ، تفضل ان شاء الله تعالى.
إن شاء الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك، ونصلي ونسلم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Ya Allah, teach us that which is beneficial for us and bless us in the knowledge you have granted us and increase our knowledge. Brothers and sisters, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you to another episode in our series, The Giants of the Islamic Civilization, the Icons of the 20th Century. And today I will be introducing a great personality from Algeria. His name is Malek Bennabi. They call him Malek Bennabi. But before going to do that, I would urge myself and everyone, inshallah, to pray for our brothers and sisters in Gaza. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help them regain their freedom and dignity and free themselves from the occupation and oppression and persecution they have been subjected to. Allahumma ansur ikhwanana fi Palestine. Allahumma kun lahum awanan wa nasira. اللهم أرنا في أعدائهم عجائب قدرتك. اللهم اجعل تدبيرهم في تدبيرهم واجعل جندهم جندا عليهم واجعل سجنهم سجنا عليهم. Today, inshallah, I will discuss this great personality. His name is Malek Bennabi, but in French they call him Malek Bennabi. So whichever name we choose to call him, is undoubtedly one of the great giants, I would call him, and a philosopher. He is a philosopher of civilization. All of his efforts were geared to look at critically the challenges, the crisis of civilization in the East and the West. And of course, he provided a project for a reawakening or a renaissance or nahla of the Islamic civilization. So I am going to deal with, because we cannot do justice to this great thinker in all of its dimensions. I will focus on some main areas. Of course, this is the standard we have been following when we studied all of the great personalities that we have covered so far. We talk about briefly his origins and the milieu that produced him, and the education and the intellectual formation, and then his ideas, analyzing the civilizational crisis, and his diagnosis, and his ideas and projects for a new reawakening or reviving the Islamic civilization. And of course, I will briefly mention some of the testimonials of people who knew him, who recognized him, who studied under him. And of course, a sampling of the wisdom is very, very insightful. Malek Bennabi was a prominent Algerian thinker, philosopher, and reformer. He was often called a second Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun was, they call Newton the father of natural sciences. And some of the Western scholars, even Orientalists, called him a father of social sciences, Ibn Khaldun. So Malek Bennabi is often called as a second Ibn Khaldun. This is a very, very important recognition of his contribution. Through his mastery of social sciences and philosophy and deep insight into the forces that shape the civilization, Malek tackle the crisis of the Muslim civilization. And of course, to several works, uh, more than 27 works, and hundreds of articles. He presented his critical, innovative ideas. He unraveled the causes of the Muslim decline and then success of the Western civilization and culture. And he provided a blueprint for a new Islamic renaissance, reawakening. Malik Omar bin Nabi, that was his full name, known as Malek Bennabi or as Bennabi, was born in Constantine, Algeria in 1905 into a family of humble means. Very poor family actually, but they were very, very pious, deeply religious, and they love the Quran and they love Islam, they love the Prophet. So they try to nurture these values in their children and they want to safeguard their Islamic morals from the corrupting influences of the French colonialists. As we mentioned that all of this, a number of these intellectuals we have covered, they all witnessed the colonization of the Muslim countries one by one: Egypt, Syria, uh, Libya, Algeria, Morocco. So, in the case of Algeria, it was occupied by France. And of course, they unleashed a reign of terror. They devastated the economics, the social and cultural structure or institutions of the society. It lasted for 130 years. 130 years. Their scorched earth policy of governance ruined the economy completely. The economy was built on wheat production, but of course they changed it. As the British people came to India and they, wanted for India to produce products for them, which they need in Britain, the same way the French colonists, they diverted this economy from an economy that will based on production of the wheat to producing raw materials and products which they need in France. So they exploited the resources and opened up the natural and human potentialities for foreigners who would be flooding the Algerian cities, occupying, just like the settlers do, settler colonialism, leaving the population, the indigenous population, Muslims poor, and forcing Algerians to rural areas to migration into major cities like Constantine and Tilismian, heading towards western Tripoli, as did the grandfather of Malek Bennabi. French colonizers sought to overhaul the cultural and educational system of Algeria and to undermine the Islamic institutions, the awqaf and all those, even the curriculum, they've tried to revamp the curriculum and make it secular. And they discourage the teaching of the deep study of Islamic sciences, the tafsir and hadith and usul al-fiqh and jurisprudence. And of course, the Islamic education was confined to the rote learning of the Quran and things like that. So 2 years after the occupation, Algerians started a resistance movement. It was led by Amir Abdul Qadir, may Allah have mercy on him, a Sufi sheikh and a warrior who fought against the French and engaged them in several battles until 1842, when his revolt was crushed very, very violently by the French colonialists. and Amir Abdul Qadir was exiled, sent into exile. Algerians were forced to flee, so migrated to various places, and Bennabi grew up hearing the heartrending stories of displacement, devastation, and the horrors of colonizers. They wanted to run away, keep their daughters, because the predatory beasts, they would come and kidnap the daughters and rape them. So they ran away to escape the horrors. Of course, because they have been uprooted, they experienced poverty and deprivation, and his family was struggling to maintain themselves, support themselves, a very meager income. His father was an ordinary clerk in the Qadi's office. His meager salary would not be enough to support the family, so his mother took up another job as a tailor, and of course she was holding the purse, which was, as Malek Bennabi described, it was always empty because it was not enough to maintain and support the family. So at one time she was forced to sell some of their home furniture to pay for the tuition fees of the children. Bennabi received his education at the traditional school and simultaneously enrolled in the French school. He really was a very precocious, intelligent student. He passed on top of his class, the highest distinction, and then, of course, he studied. Same time, he studied in the French school as well, because his mind was opened, and the desire to seek knowledge would never leave him, without continuing, vigorously study his studies, pursued postgraduate studies in Paris. Of course, he went to France with the hope of getting admission in the Oriental studies. But although he passed that interview, because of his original ideas and his ideas of resistance against the colonialists, they did not give him admission in that department which he wanted to study. So he pursued his studies as an engineer and graduated in 1939 from there. But he was a self-taught intellectual, and he became a voracious reader. He read everything he could get hold of. He would spend hours and hours in the library poring over all of the works related to philosophy, humanities, social sciences, you name it. He, he mastered all of this side by side with his intensive studies of philosophy, humanities, and social sciences. He also made an in-depth study of Islamic sources. So here comes the two streams. Now he has an in-depth mastery of the social sciences and humanities and philosophical sciences. He also now came under the influence of the works of Ibn Khaldun, the father of social sciences in Islamic history, as well as the reform ideas of contemporary Muslim thinkers such as Muhammad Abdu, Allama Dr. Iqbal, Muhammad Iqbal, Abdur Rahman al-Kawakibi, and Ibn Badis and others. So he was well read in all of this. He was also aware of the works of the contemporary Islamic movements such as Ikhwan al-Muslimun and others, but he never ever became formally affiliated with any of these movements. He was an independent thinker, although it is said he admired Imam Hassan al-Banna greatly, and he would listen to his discourses, and he said Hassan al-Banna, Shaheed Hassan al-Banna stirred up an Islamic awakening among the people. The Quran, in its discourses, emerged as neither as cold nor dry nor ritualistic, but radiating a life-giving message which was at once enlightening and guiding and inspiring people. Malek Bennabi's long stay in France, of course, exposed him to both the positive and negative aspects of European civilization. Actually, there he would marry his wife, a French convert to Islam, who would be his companion, who would help him in his intellectual pursuits. He experienced racism, discrimination, and humiliation the Muslims and foreigners were subjected to in France, as well as in the country they colonized. He was fascinated by the wealth of creative ideas in Europe, but he also became horrified by their moral bankruptcy and sexual immorality. His prolonged studies, critical thinking, and interactions stirred up his interest in-depth to undertake an in-depth study of the Quran. After spending years, he produced his first masterpiece. It was Al-Wahiratul Quraniyah. Translated, of course, the work was originally in French. Later on, it would be translated into Arabic. In English, it is the Quranic phenomenon. That was in 1946. In this work, he expounded the Quranic miracle. He compared the Quranic narrative of Prophet Yusuf with the biblical narrative and showed the uniqueness of the Quran, showing how this Quran can never be the work of a human being. It's nothing but the work of the Creator. He followed it up with another work, Shurut al-Nahla, or the prerequisites of Renaissance, in 1948. Both of these works established his reputation as an original Muslim thinker. While in Paris, he established contacts with the French intellectuals and academics. And in one of his lectures, which was well attended by intellectuals, he expressed a renewed faith in Islam and presented Islam as another alternative. Why are we Muslims? So he tried to show logically how Islam provides an alternative civilizational model that can replace the Western civilization, which is becoming bankrupt and losing its, effectiveness to guide, to save the civilization. His bold and innovative ideas attracted the eminent French Orientalist Louis Massignon, should be Louis Massignon, not Louis Massignon, who invited him for a dialogue. Massignon was an outstanding Orientalist, produced a lot of disciples among Muslims and non-Muslims. Massignon was impressed by the confidence and boldness of Bennabi in facing European colonialism. In 1954, Bennabi moved to Cairo, where he was welcomed and offered as an post of an advisor or of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Manallamatu Ta'awun al-Islami, allowing him to continue his literary and intellectual works. Abdul Nasser would give him a salary, a monthly salary, where he can, spread his ideas. He could brush up his Arabic, and of course, all this along he has been, all of his literary works were in French. This is what the colonialists did in Algeria. They wanted to change the language, Arabic, replace it with French. And of course, so he had, when he moved to Cairo, he had to brush up. Although he is born an Arab, he lost his mastery, his fluency of Arabic, so he had to brush up his Arabic in Cairo. He has been hitherto working solely in French. In Cairo, he attracted a large number of students and intellectuals, and he was invited to deliver lectures in various parts of Egypt, as well as in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, elsewhere. In 1963, Bennabi returned to Algeria following independence, and he was appointed as the Director of Advanced Studies. In this capacity, he continued his literary work and lecturing to students and intellectuals and common people. In 1967, however, he resigned from his post because he had differences, because he realized that the secularized elite of the Muslim world, they would not entertain creative new ideas because they have the Western interest in putting a lid on independent thinking and fresh ideas. So he wanted to devote himself exclusively to intellectual projects. Through his articles and publications, he expounded his ideas on civilization, culture, colonialism, civilizational crisis, renewal, and renaissance. He left behind a massive intellectual legacy. Exactly like Ibn Khaldun, Ibn Khaldun was never discovered, did not, his Muslim audience did not understand him, did not appreciate him. They are now discovering him. The same with Bennabi, because he is compared with Ibn Khaldun for his social, creative ideas on civilization and progress and rise and fall of civilizations. So Bennabi received very little appreciation during his lifetime. He wrote over 25 books between 1946, starting with that Al-Wahiratul Quraniya, and of course Shurutul Nahla and Mushkilatul Halara, and all. He had a memoir in two volumes, Witness of the 20th Century, Shahidul Qarn al-Ishreen, and many, many other works, on Islam and the Quran and the Reformation issues, Mushkilatul Halara, the challenges of Muslim civilization or civilization is facing. And he kept writing until 1973. Because of those he called the imperialist enemies, many of his works were prevented from being published because they were afraid, because of the critical approach he took to the subjects. They didn't want, this is the dilemma Muslim world is still facing. They don't want fresh, independent academic freedom, intellectual freedom, freedom to think and express ideas and opinions. So there were some of his works were lost or censored, and although the importance of his work was not recognized during his lifetime, even among Muslims, he was convinced that future generations would discover his thoughts. Following a short illness, he died on October 31st, 1973, in Algeria. But before he died, he told his daughter that he would return after 30 years. He will not be coming back alive, but he meant is his thought, his contributions will be remembered, revived, and people will discover uh, the value of his dream is being materialized today as we find a renewed interest in the ideas of Malek Bennabi all over the Muslim world, uh, Middle East, as well as Malaysia, Indonesia, and other places. Now, civilizational crisis and diagnosis. This was the issue that challenged. He took up the challenge of tackling civilization, the crisis of civilization, and how the crisis of Islamic civilization, how we can revive the civilization. The term civilization first appeared in Muslim cultural tradition in the 14th century writings of Ibn Khaldun as a necessary state where humans dwell and settle together. Imran, he used the word Imran. Imran is a word, Quranic term for, Allah has istamarakum fiha. Allah has, made us settle down and develop a civilization, you know. So Ibn Khaldun searched for universal laws and fundamental principles that govern human societies and civilizations and determine their destiny in history, how they rise and what are the sources of decline of civilization and how they fall eventually. The concept of civilization developed further among Muslim intellectuals in the late 19th century with the Islamic revival and the Muslim confrontations with the modern Europe. They used the word hadara. Hadara became popular scientific and intellectual circles in the Arab world. However, Bennabi was a pioneer in choosing it to denote civilization. Okay. In other languages of the Muslim world, madaniya or its derivatives were used. Bennabi's concern about the decline of Muslim civilization led him to analyze its causes and provide solutions. Rather than address the dilemma with economics, politics, and ideology, he emphasized the role of ideas as a catalyst for the birth or the growth and the development of civilization. His interdisciplinary approach to civilization, meaning he combined, he is a scientist by training, engineer by training, so mathematics, this precision of science, scientific precision, his philosophical insight, and his in-depth study of humanities and social sciences, and psychology, sociology. So his interdisciplinary approach to civilization and analyzing its structure highlights theory that internal, external, and social intellectual force govern civilization. And then an equation can be generated for civilization itself. For Bennabi, religion is the most critical catalyst for the equation man, soil, time. The three factors. There is man, and there is soil or the resources, and then the time equal to civilization. The three working in harmony and combination, in balance, produce a civilization. The significant, these three elements are important for reversing the Muslim decline. Man is the central force in any civilizing process. Without him, the other two elements lack value. So, soil and time cannot produce anything unless the man is educated and trained to play his vital role, his nurturing, his creativity, his exposure to ideas, and his endowments, realizing his potential to create and develop and think. Without that, the two elements, the soil and the time, cannot produce anything. Muslims must first change their spiritual condition before successfully changing society or civilization. It's a quote in the Quranic verse. You would recite this often. Never inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Verily, never will Allah change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. With a deep understanding of Islam and the social sciences, Bennabi approached the performance of human societies and the dynamics of culture and civilization from a universal perspective. He tried to resolve the social problems within the framework of civilization. The intelligible unit for studying socio-historic, he said, the problem of every people in a sense is that of a civilization. His approach to studying civilization and his course in history helps to diagnose the Muslim civilizational crisis and explain its origins and solutions. His scientific training, historical and sociological and philosophical outlook enabled him to analyze European civilization and generate original thoughts and analysis of the Muslim Ummah's strengths and weaknesses. He said Islam and the Prophet Muhammad changed the foundations of social relationship in tribal Arab society to an ideas-based civil Islamic culture that combined different social strata and ethnic groups. So Islam, this is one of his main message to the Muslim world, that we need to have a forum, an Islamic, just like United Nations of Islam, there is a need for an Islamic forum, platform for uniting all the Muslim countries so that they can work on a common platform, imbued, inspired by the Quranic ideas, the same foundational ideas that produced the magnificent Islamic civilization. As the founder of a new society and civilization, Prophet Muhammad realized urban development should replace a nomadic and tribal culture, because he did not want the Muslim community stay in the primal tribal condition. He moved the society forward to advanced state of civilization. City of Medina was the nucleus for a civilizational transformation, a global civilization which took on the world, which was able to go into various parts of the world, with fresh ideas, creative ideas. They took on the raw material, the soil, the resources, and transformed all of them into a giant force civilizational project. Bennabi criticized the modern Muslim world's reformist and modernist trends for overlooking crisis causes and focusing on symptoms. He realized that he said that Muhammad Abdu was just a theologian. He was inspired by Allama Iqbal's approach, where, without being inspired and moved by the Quran into activism, it becomes dry theology. That is what he thought, although he admired the project of the works of Muhammad Abdu and others, but they said they were not practical people. They were theologians. As opposed to theology, what we need is, the spiritual power of the Quran, transforming the individual to act, remold the history, to mold the history, to change the history, So efforts to ignite a renaissance in the Muslim world did not produce a systematic approach. Why? The problem was rooted in the Muslim culture of the recent past. Muslims were going looking to the past. Of course, we have to have that memory of the past, but we cannot stagnate. We have to move on. In so many of his work, he advocated the importance for Muslims while recognizing the treasure of the past, the wisdom and the memory of the past. We should move on to create in the present, inspired by the Quranic ideals. Colonization is not the main reason we cannot blame colonizers. We have to blame ourselves because they colonize us because لكي لا نكون مستعمرين يجب أن نتخلص من القابلية للاستعمار. If we want to free ourselves from colonization, we need to free ourselves. If you have to safeguard ourselves from colonization or being colonized, we need to get rid of those factors that brought upon us uh, the made us victims of colonization. So it's all in the mind. Muslim have to make a drastic change in their thinking. He asserted that moral and material factors are crucial to create balance and liveliness in human society and generate solidarity and unity. He defined the civilization by its structure and social science. The human being learns how to live within a group and perceive the essential importance of the network of social relations in organizing human life in order to perform its historical function and responsibilities. He said all objects or things human produce result from man, insan, turab, soil, and time. The three elements found in every society are the fundamentals for a society to begin a civilizing process. So, for that, we have to address the construction of personality. Also, soil exploitation, the use of resources, and time organization and management. Only then will civilization provide the necessary social services and assistance human need for development. In this equation, the three factors, insan is the primary device of civilization. We already mentioned that in a central force in any. When we criticize the reformist movement, we're certain to reform the milieu rather than human factor. So this was the failure. They need to come down to mentor and train the individual on the ground, reform the man. Civilization rises with the integrated type of man who transforms his characters into his ideals to undertake the social role. So they did not succeed in training individuals, people on the ground. Bennabi's equation, religion is essential to organize and direct the three elements towards the civilizing process. But Muslims have lost because our reading of the Quran is merely reading for reading's sake. It's not for action. All civilizations, without exception in history, have flourished amid religious ideas. In Bennabi's approach, religion cannot begin its civilizing function unless it embarks on a civilizing process that assembles the three elements in one project. So, according to Bennabi, the realm of ideas, the ideas important, the role of ideas, and the ideas impressed from secular, sacred sources functions at a pattern that orients and guides society to specific values. So in the Quran, in Islamic, the Quran, in other civilizations, they have their own scriptures, they have religious traditions. So in the Muslim civilization, transformative ideas are derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. Bennabi considers civilization the result of a living, dynamic idea that mobilizes a pre-civilized society to enter history and construct a system of ideas according to its archetypes. This is what the Prophet did. Islam did in the initial stages. Ideas give vision and original pattern to society to formulate civilization and form a prototype everyone can follow. The realm of ideas is essential for society to undertake any constructive role. So it provides the tools, channels, natural resources, and instruments for the civilizing process. Since Bennabi was primarily concerned with reconstructing Muslim society, reviving its culture, and purging it from negative elements inherited from its age of decline, he emphasized the need for a sociology of independence. The starting point for that sociology is to redefine society. He implied that while the natural society is a static society, the historical society is dynamic. According to him, some characters are common in all societies to all societies. The social relations network links members of society and directs activities to fulfill a standard function, society's specific mission and vocation. He argued that the lack of new ideas in Islamic thought emerged from what he coined civilizational bankruptcy. Hence, in order to recover the former magnificence, the glory of Islamic civilization, Islamic society had to become an environment where individuals feel empowered. In other words, to satisfy his spiritual and material needs, a Muslim needed to feel that his effort, his creativity, his ideas would find reward, will be rewarded by the society. Testimonials, people are discovering the value of this great thinker now, and they continue to shower. I have just took some of this, touched some of them. Some of this has been praised as a mentor for all the Arab intellectuals in one way or another, because all of them have now is coming under his influence now. Some of them refer to him and consider him a true successor of Ibn Khaldun for his innovative ideas on progress, culture, and civilization. The eminent Syrian scholar Muhammad al-Mubarak showered high praise on him. I don't call him the son of the prophet because his name is Malek Bennabi, which means son of the prophet. It's allegorical. They don't mean that is son of the prophet because of the reverence for the prophet. They named him like that. So he's saying, I don't call him the son of the prophet, but certainly believe he has drunk deeply from the founder springs of prophecy and its eternal truths. Although he was an intellectual who was critical in his thinking and analysis, his disciples described him as a profoundly pious Sufi who was found either writing always. He was seen either writing and thinking or praying. He has only two occasions. One of them said, one of his disciples said, whenever we visited him, if we found his window was open, then for sure we are convinced that he will be immersed in his thinking and writing. But if we find the window closed, certainly we will know he would be standing in prayer. So he is deeply, so that's why, he said our theologians lack this spiritual immersion in the Quran. Shifa of Ibn Sina cannot unless Quran becomes molds our flesh and blood, enters into deeply, it transforms us from within. He would describe the effect of the Quran as Malama Iqbal would describe the effect of the Quran. If you are not burned, if you are not molded by this Quranic fire, burned by that fire, nothing, no individual. That individual cannot function, cannot be a dynamo for producing results. You know, the irony is Muslims read, they say they love the Quran and they read it, but they are not molded by it. His friends and disciples describe him as a humble and generous person who was always caring and helpful and often went off his way to serve them. He provides all of his works for treasure house of wisdom, inexhaustible wisdom. So I thought I would bring some of this. It's a very, very, each one the pearl, they are pearls, worthy of gems, worthy of constant reflection and thinking. Muslims are not deficient in the logic of thought. Islam has all this material as far as thought is concerned, that we have that, but it's the logic of action and movement that Muslims are lacking. Because Muslims doesn't think about acting. We only love to talk and talk and talk. No action. It is the law of heaven. Change yourself. You will change history. Is referring to the Quranic verse. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. Another important. Allah's law in His creation is that idols emerge when critical thinking becomes absent. This is what's happening. We set up idols. When the society loses the ability to think, to critically think and criticize and analyze, we end up setting up idols and statues. If we want to save ourselves from being colonized, we should rid ourselves of the factors that expose us to colonization in the first place. Don't blame colonizers because they ran to us because we are ready, fertile soil to be colonized. We cannot import civilization by importing products and inventions. Civilization is innovation, creativity, not imitation, not subservience, not copying others. Many people think that we can just transplant this technology, these industries, these products. So Apple, bring Microsoft, bring all these computers. So of course, once we have amassed this material wealth and resources and tools and technology, no, he said that doesn't work that way. You cannot import values. You cannot import ideas. I have to generate this within. If idolatry in Islam is ignorance, ignorance in itself is idolatry, for it does not engender thinking. Instead, it only sets up idols. This is another way of putting the same concept. We ought to create a civilization. In other words, we should create and not stagnate. You know, just thinking about the past and glories and continuously singing about how glorious we were, how magnificent, the majestic that was Islamic civilization. You can continue to say that, but it will not affect unless you take action. Action should be based on creative ideas, creative thinking. It's not innovation, it's innovation and creativity that produces civilization and not dogmatic attachment to past glories or concept. Another, Muslims are victims of taqleed. You cannot simply create history by walking in the footsteps of others in its entirety. Of course, we have to emulate the models and precepts, yes, he's not negating that, but we should open up new pathways for ourselves while discovering the value of the that historic memory. We should also open new pathways for ourselves. Freedom is a heavy burden on a society whose elites are not trained to discharge the responsibilities of its liberation. We have to to free ourselves, we need to free our thinking from imitation, copying blindly the West and its morals, its products. We need to free ourselves. We have to be critical, whether it's good or bad. We have to be able to sift through. They say Muslim societies are living according to the principles of the Quran. This is not true, he said. We should rather say the truth is Muslims parrot the principles of the Quran. You know why? Because of absence of practical application in their behavior. And while we are lacking practical application. And he says, let us teach every child, woman, and man to set aside a minimum half an hour every day to engage in practical, productive work, methodically and systematically. You know, atomic habit, they say, you know, little. Of course, this is the great concept of the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Kana amaluhu dima. Everything he did so consistently, habitually. So whatever little you do, let it be productive and let it be consistent, let it be methodical and systematic. You know, so powerful the management of time. If we were to manage the time and use it efficiently to produce something that is beneficial, what will happen? Every day we set aside minimum half a day. At the end of the year, you would leave behind a tremendous output intellectually, morally, economically, and all areas. The wealth of a society should not be measured by its material possessions, but by the quality of its ideas. So this is a criticism that is very relevant, still relevant to all of the Muslim countries, where they are running to amass wealth, the technology, the products, and the industry, thinking that they can change, create a civilizational change. Of course, he said it will not. You don't measure the wealth by material possessions, but by the quality of ideas. But ideas are generated in a society where there is freedom of thought, where you are you are free to criticize, academic criticism, political criticism, social criticism. Society may face, you know why? How is if society may face painful devastation due to natural calamities or war, everything, all of the material possessions could be wiped out. But if it has not lost mastery, if it has lost the mastery of fresh ideas, the devastation becomes complete and irreversible. On the other hand, if it still masters, is still creative, it is it did not suffer the loss of ideas, it lost nothing because everything could be rebuilt once again. So this is a great thinker that we have. You know, I could not cover all aspects of his creative ideas. I tried to provide some gist of it because it's very deep. It's interdisciplinary. So it's based on his exhaustive study of social sciences and humanities and also Islamic sources of sciences. So, and his immersion in the being molded by the spirit of the Quran. And we need to benefit from such scholars and pioneers and icons of our civilization. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honor us to love them, and by their love, by loving them and loving their thought and trying to just act upon some of those ideas. Of course, this one statement of his, that if we were to set aside every single day half an hour, if it is more than more, so at least consistently set aside to do embark on a project, creative project that is will move the society forward morally, culturally, spiritually. At the end of the year, we will end up with a massive output that will be our lasting legacy. Definitely, Malik Bennabi left behind a great legacy of fresh ideas and insights, which would be, inshallah, the Muslim scholars are discovering them, and they will surely, inshallah, the new generation will take upon the challenge and produce more ideas so that we can see a rebirth of a new Islamic civilization taking on the leadership of the world, because Quran, as Malik ibn Nabi said, has the potential, but Muslims have to explore and realize that potential by transforming it into practical solutions, practical patterns that people can emulate and live their lives accordingly. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.